The parable of the sower appears in all three synoptic gospels, and in Matthew it comes with an explanation that the disciples request. But there is something strange about that explanation, something that most readers slide past because they assume it is complete. Jesus describes four soils in the telling: the path, the rocky ground, the thorns, and the good soil. Then, when the disciples ask what the parable means, he interprets the first three in careful detail. The seed snatched away from the path. The seed that springs up quickly and withers for lack of root. The seed choked by thorns. And then, for the fourth soil, he gives a single truncated sentence: the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields 100-fold or 60 or 30. That is not an interpretation. It is a label. He explains the failure of the other three soils in terms of specific obstacles: the evil one, tribulation, the cares of the world. But for the good soil, he offers no obstacle, no mechanism, no process. He simply says it works. The entire weight of the parable rests on an explanation that is not actually an explanation. That asymmetry is not accidental. Matthew's gospel is the most structured of the four, built around 5 major discourses and a careful architecture of fulfillment quotations. It does not drop details. If the explanation stops short at the good soil, it is because the parable itself demands something from the listener that a full explanation would short-circuit. The good soil cannot be explained the same way as the others because the good soil is not defined by what happens to it externally, it is defined by what it does internally with the seed. The path, the rocky ground, and the thorns all fail because of forces outside themselves. The good soil succeeds because of a capacity inside itself that the text never names directly. And that is the point. The good soil is the one who hears, and the word for understanding in verse 23 is the Greek *sunami*, a verb that means to bring together, to piece together, to comprehend by gathering the parts into a whole. The good soil is not a passive recipient. It is an active participant in the process. The seed does not produce fruit automatically. It produces fruit in the person who does the work of *sunami*, who takes the word and assembles it into living understanding. This changes everything about how the parable functions. If the good soil is simply the one who produces fruit, then the parable becomes a sorting mechanism. Find out which soil you are and hope you are the right one. But if the good soil is the one who hears and understands actively, repeatedly, with a mind and heart that assemble the word into life, then the parable is not a diagnostic tool. It is a summons. The missing explanation for the good soil is the space where the listener is supposed to step in and do the work of understanding that the text refuses to do for them. The path, the rocky ground, and the thorns are explained because they are static categories. The good soil is not a category, it is a direction. And you cannot explain a direction by describing the destination. You have to walk it. The cultural setting makes this even sharper. First-century Galilean farming did not follow the neat rows of modern agriculture. Farmers sowed seed first and then plowed it under, so seed would inevitably fall on packed pathways, on rocky patches where the soil was thin, and among thorn bushes that had not yet been cleared. The scene Jesus describes was not unusual. It was ordinary. The sower was not being wasteful or careless. He was sowing in the normal way, trusting that the plowing and the rains and the soil itself would do their work. The listeners knew this. They had watched their fathers and neighbors sow exactly this way. So when Jesus tells a story about a sower who throws seed everywhere, they would not have thought the sower was foolish. They would have thought the story was about the soil, about what the soil does or does not do with the seed it receives. And that is precisely where the tension lands. Because if the good soil is the one that bears fruit, and if the good soil is the only one with no explanation, then the parable is not giving the listener an answer. It is giving the listener a question. What makes good soil good? The text refuses to say. And the refusal is deliberate because the answer cannot be given in advance. The good soil is not a condition you can check off. The good soil is a process you enter every time you hear the word and do the work of understanding. The path, the rocky ground, and the thorns are all forms of hearing that stop short of that work. The path hears but does not let the seed in. The rocky ground hears with joy but does not let the seed root. The thorns hear but let other concerns crowd the seed out. Each one is a variation on the same failure. The word arrives, and something prevents it from becoming understanding. The good soil is simply the one where that prevention does not happen. But why? The parable does not say. The explanation does not say. And that is the gap that every reader must fill, not with a theory, but with the actual practice of hearing and understanding. Most people who read this parable come away asking themselves which soil they are. That is the natural question, and it is also the wrong one. The parable is not about identifying your soil type because the soil type is not fixed. The same person can be the path at one moment and the thorns at another. The same heart that receives the word with joy today can be choked by anxiety tomorrow. The soils are not permanent categories of people. They are states of reception that shift with time, pressure, and attention. The good soil is not a birthright. It is a posture. And the missing explanation serves exactly that purpose. It keeps the door open, it refuses to let the listener settle into a comfortable diagnosis, and it forces the question back onto the act of hearing itself. The disciples, of course, ask for the explanation in the first place. And before Jesus gives it, he tells them something that makes the whole scene even stranger. He says, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given." Then he quotes Isaiah about people who hear but do not understand, who look but do not perceive. The implication is that understanding is a gift, not a skill. But then he gives the parable explanation to the disciples, and that explanation still withholds the mechanism of the good soil. Even the insiders do not get a full blueprint. The gift of understanding is not a shortcut. It is an invitation to keep working, keep digging, keep assembling the pieces. The disciples are not given a finished product. They are given a direction. And that is where the application lands for anyone reading this passage today. The common reflex is to read the parable, identify your struggles with tribulation or the cares of the world, and then resolve to be better soil. But the text does not offer that resolution. It offers something more demanding and more freeing. It says that the good soil is not a destination you reach. It is a rhythm you enter. Every time you hear the word and refuse to let it be snatched, every time you let it take root beyond the initial excitement, every time you clear the thorns of competing concerns, you are being the good soil. Not by achieving a permanent state, but by repeating the act. The missing explanation is the space where that repetition happens. The parable does not describe the good soil because the parable is not describing. It is calling. So here is the tension that the first half of the passage will not let you escape. Jesus explains 3 failures but leaves the success unexplained. And that unexplained success is the hinge on which everything turns. You cannot get to the end of verse 23 without feeling that something is missing. Something is missing because something is supposed to be missing. The next part of this passage will push into why that missing piece is the most important part of the entire parable, and what it demands from the person who is willing to stop sorting soils and start sowing hearing into understanding. The missing piece is not a flaw in the telling. It is the design of the telling. Jesus explains the 3 failures because failures have clear mechanisms the evil one snatches, tribulation withers, cares choke. Those are external forces with predictable effects. But the good soil has no external mechanism because the good soil is not defined by what happens to it. It is defined by what it does with what it receives. The seed in the good soil does not have a different nature than the seed anywhere else. It is the same word, the same sower, the same seed. The difference is entirely in the soil's response, and the soil's response cannot be explained from the outside because it is an interior act. The moment Jesus tried to explain the good soil the same way he explained the others, he would turn it into another static condition. He would say the good soil is the one that has deep roots, or the one that keeps the thorns out, or the one that the birds cannot reach. But none of those explain the good soil. Those are just descriptions of what the good soil is not. The good soil is the one that bears fruit, and fruit is not a condition you possess. Fruit is a result of a living process that cannot be reduced to a formula. So the parable does something audacious. It gives the listener the 3 clear diagnoses, the 3 things that go wrong, and then it deliberately withholds the prescription for what goes right. It trusts the listener to understand that the absence of the diagnosis is the point. You cannot be told how to become good soil because becoming good soil is not a technique. It is a relationship. The seed has to do its work in you, and you have to let it. The word Jesus uses for the good soil in verse 23 is the same word he uses for the sower in verse 3. The one who sows is sparrow and the soil that bears fruit is carpophoreo from karpos fruit and pharaoh to bring or bear. The sower sows the seed. The good soil bears the fruit. But the seed and the fruit are not disconnected. The seed produces the fruit. The soil does not manufacture fruit from nothing. It receives the seed, it holds it, it lets it grow, and the seed produces the fruit through the soil. The good soil is not a producer in its own right. It is a participant in something larger than itself. That participation is where the present-day reader has to stop and let the weight of the missing explanation settle. Most of the time, when we read this parable, we are looking for a way to secure our own status as good soil. We want to be certain that we are the ones who will bear fruit. And the text refuses to give that certainty. It offers no checklist. It offers no guarantee that if you do X, Y, and Z, you will be good soil. Instead, it offers a pattern of hearing that requires ongoing, intentional engagement. The good soil is not a state you achieve once. It is a state you re-enter every time you hear the word. Every time you read the text, every time you sit under preaching, every time you meditate on scripture, you have to choose whether you will be the path, the rocky ground, the thorns, or the good soil. And the choice is not made by declaring yourself good soil. It is made by doing the work of ***, by bringing the word together with your life, by assembling understanding out of hearing, by refusing to stop until the word has taken root and started to grow. The Isaiah quotation that Jesus inserts before the explanation adds another layer. He says that the reason some people hear without understanding is that their heart has grown dull. The Greek word for that dullness is ***, which literally means to make thick or fat. It is the word used for a heart that has become coated, insensible, unable to feel the weight of what it hears. That is not a permanent condition. It is a condition that sets in gradually, by repeated refusal to engage. The heart grows thick by ignoring the word, by letting the cares of the world layer over it, by hearing without responding. And the inverse is also true. The heart becomes good soil by repeated, active engagement with the word, not by a single dramatic conversion, not by a moment of emotional intensity that fades by Tuesday, but by the patient, grinding work of bringing the word back to mind, of letting it confront your anxieties about money and status and security, of letting it expose your shallow enthusiasm and demand real depth. There is a cultural reality here that modern readers often miss because we have romanticized farming. First-century Galilean soil was not uniformly productive. It varied widely within the same field, within the same row. The same plot of ground could have patches of good deep soil and patches of rocky crust within feet of each other. The farmer did not treat the whole field as one soil type. He worked the ground, broke up the clods, removed the stones, pulled the thorns. And that is the image the parable is pressing. The good soil is not a piece of ground that was born good. It is ground that has been prepared, tilled, cleared. It is ground that receives the seed and then continues to be worked by the sower. The sower does not abandon the seed once it lands. He plows it in. He waters it. He protects it. The good soil is not good because of anything it did to earn the seed. It is good because it became receptive through the work of the one who sows. Which means the missing explanation for the good soil is actually a kind of mirror. The parable forces the listener to stop asking which soil am I, and start asking what kind of hearing am I doing right now. That is a much harder question because it cannot be answered once and filed away. It has to be answered every time you open the text, every time you hear a sermon, every time you sit in silence and let the word work. And the answer will not always be the same. You can be the good soil at 8 a.m. and the thorns by 10. You can receive the word with joy on Sunday and let it be choked by a financial worry on Monday. The parable is not a one-time diagnosis. It is a daily practice. Jesus does not explain the good soil because explaining it would turn it into a destination instead of a direction. The good soil is the direction you are facing when you hear the word and let it into the parts of your life that are hard, shallow, and crowded. There is a strange comfort in this. If the good soil were something you had to achieve permanently, you would live in constant fear of losing it. But the parable does not treat the soil as a fixed identity. It treats the soil as a condition that changes with the seed. The seed transforms the soil it lands in. The word does not just find good soil. It creates good soil. It breaks up the hard path of your resistance. It splits the rock of your bitterness. It uproots the thorns of your distraction. The seed does not adapt to the soil. The soil adapts to the seed if you let it. And that is the work the explanation leaves undone. Jesus does not do it for you. He does not tell you how to become good soil because the process is different for every heart. He only tells you what happens when you stop resisting. The fruit comes, not because you manufactured it, because the seed was always meant to produce fruit, and the soil that stops fighting the seed will find itself bearing fruit beyond what it could have planned or predicted. So what do you do with the missing explanation? You stop trying to find yourself in the parable as a fixed category. You stop asking whether you are the path or the thorns. You start paying attention to your hearing. You notice when the word lands and immediately gets pushed aside by the next notification, the next anxiety, the next distraction. You notice when you feel a surge of spiritual excitement that fades as soon as you leave the room. You notice when the word collides with your love for comfort or money or approval, and you feel the collision but do not resolve it. And in those moments, you have a choice. You can let the thorns win. Or you can do the work of synonym asterisk. You can bring the word back. You can hold it in front of the resistance. You can let it do the slow, patient work of transforming the soil you are at that moment. The missing explanation is not an oversight. It is a gift. It is the space where the Holy Spirit does the work that no explanation could accomplish. It is the space where your hearing becomes your doing. The heavy thing the passage leaves you with is not a question. It is an invitation that looks like an absence. The good soil has no explanation because the good soil is not a finished product. The good soil is you right now in the act of hearing and understanding. You do not need to know how it works. You only need to keep letting it work. The seed is already in the ground. The fruit is coming. Trust the seed.